Good morning and good Yontif. Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So what better way to open up the day with Chassidus, the Rabbi Rashab's Chassidus. So in Hemshech Ayin Beis, the magnum opus of all of Chassidus, volume 3, page 1269, Aleph Reish Samach Tes. Yeah. And we're middle of the Reshimu. The Rabbi Rashab is giving us relatively a pretty comprehensive picture of this thing called the Reshimu. But first, the context. Context is like this, that there's a presenting question that began on the bottom of page 1266 and top of 1267. And as you see always, I always refer to the important, because the flow is all flowing from that question. And that question is being answered as we speak. And that question is, what ultimately allows Simcha Shal Mitzvah, and remember, Mitzvah and Simcha together, really to pierce the highest levels in Atzmus, Ein Sof, beyond the entire structure, and to bring that into the structure. We learned how Simcha breaks through boundaries, and how mitzvahs reach these highest levels. And B'chol Moedecha, that deep love, that all-consuming love, the Ava Rabbi B'Tainugim, the Avoid of Etzem HaNeshama, we learned all that. And yet, the Rebbe Rashab, he clearly wants to go one step further into understanding that what ultimately, when we're in the structure of Kalim, which all this is defined by, even if we grow to the highest point, as I said, there's a limit. But however, what has not been addressed is the very Kalim themselves carry a power. Till now, we've been talking about how we elevate through these Kalim and we expand them to be able to reach highest levels. But we haven't talked about what about the very Kalim are also divine. God put them there. They're not man-made. So now we're talking about the power of these Kalim, that their root is deeper and higher than the root of the Eiris. In the words of the Maim of the Hemshech here, that the Eir is rooted in Hispashtus Ha'er, in expression, in extension, and revelation, and the Kalim are rooted in Etzem Ha'er, Etzem, or what he called, maybe the reason he didn't use the word Eir, because Eir indicates Gili, what he called Atzmus Umuhus, Ein Soy Baruch Hu. To explain that, the Rebbe Rashab went back to the dynamics of how Kalim and Eiris evolve and develop in their earliest stage of formation. We're not talking now the Sheirish all the way in the difference between the two levels that he spoke, Etzem and Hispashtus. We're now discussing how they actually become actualized after the Tzimtzum, with the root of the Kalim being the Reshimu, and the root of the Eiris being the Kav. And the emphasis here is the advantage, the Yisra and Maila, as he called it, of the Reshimu over the Kav. So let's just sum it up, because you spelled out a few bunch of points. It's important to really know what those points are. So I'm going to now sum up what we learned. So he said the following. I'm reviewing now page 1268 and 1269, the paragraph that we till the top of 1269 where we stopped. So he said like this: Sheirish HaKelim, Sheirish HaEris, right? So the words are, the Reshimu means something remained, Nisher Meklolos HaEir, Kishaloi Hoya Amokim Ponei Adayin. That's the simple meaning of Reshimu, means a trace, a remains, something remains. A trace, an impression, I said residue, but however you explain it, and the different examples given for the Chassidus, but it cannot say it's not connected to that which was before, else you can't call it a Reshimu, like he said later. If the Reshimu is some ways cut off from that which was before, then you can't call it a Reshimu. You can call it a force that emerged after the Tzimtzum, but why call it Reshimu? Kav, for example, is an entity. It's called a ray of light. Yes, the light is originating from before the Tzimtzum, but the Tzimtzum has a very deep impact on it, as we'll discuss in a moment. As soon as you say Reshimu, you're saying literally it's some type of, say, fossil or relic from a different state. That's why it's called Reshimu. And there is differences, as the concept of Reshimu was explained by the Rabbi through the generations, and the differences of opinions about it. Initially, it was still seen as a very faint trace, as especially the Rebbe Marash and then the Rebbe Rashab in full glory turned the Reshimu into a complete trace. It's still a trace, and it's called trace because it's concealed, and compared to Er HaBli Gvul, Koyach HaGvul is a Reshimu. But it's no longer seen just as a faint and just a small entity, but actually it carries within it, in a concealed state, the whole pre-Tzimtzum consciousness, shall we say. But in the way Oisius carry it, which means there's no there's no gilui of it, but it's there. So it's like saying that after the Tzimtzum, something remained from before, but it's not revealed yet. So he says that's klolos ha'er k'shelo yemukim. The kavachut, on the other hand, only emerged after the Tzimtzum. But you can't say the kavachut, you can't say it existed before. Yes, the light existed, and the kav will receive from that light. But the kav is a creation of the Tzimtzum. The Reshimu remains because of the Tzimtzum, because the Tzimtzum conceals the rest, but you can't say it's created by the Tzimtzum, because it's actually a product of pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. Whereas the kav is an example that we're going to be learning moment, is the teacher already being diminishing and concealing his brilliance and now teaching Ayin Beis, or the spoon-feeding teaching to the student. The Reshimu remains in the background because it's not revealed, but what it carries is the entire picture of pre-Tzimtzum. Now he's going to break this down. This entire picture has levels. So let's dissect it. Okay, that's a general structure, general distinction between Kav and Tzimtzum. On the other hand, and Reshimu, just for the record, the Kav has a different Maila, which is of course Gili. If the teacher only had a Reshimu of everything that was in his mind, the student wouldn't benefit from it. You need to teach. So the Kav at the end of the day is the paintbrush that I described yesterday. And without a paintbrush, you don't have any art. It doesn't matter what is behind the scenes, and there's what is so-called called the superconscious state or the concealed state. But nevertheless, the Reshimu carries that power in a concealed way, as we shall learn. So now he continues. Says like this. I'm just going to read key lines. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but I think, as I said, it's critical to really break it down. And because of this distinction that the Reshimu is, like he said, from the klolos ha'er, it's a trace, or you'll say an impression from before the Tzimtzum. Actually, I like the word impression, because impression indicates two things. Number one, it's not revealed. Secondly, it's like a full impression. It's like it's like somebody who was in the experience wrote notes about it, but the notes are concealed, so to speak. So he says, because of this, yesh yisrin kloli b'Reshimu, that it's ma'atzmus u'mahusa ha'er. Again, he's using the word atzmus u'mahusa ha'er. In other words, you're getting, and I think it's vital, what means atzmus u'mahusa ha'er in the analogy of the artist, and the same analogy can be an author. It's the atzmus u'mahus of what is lying behind the art, in the artist's heart and soul, that is not revealed in the image or the art that he's creating. So atzmus u'mahusa ha'er is like, in this case, the atzmus u'mahus of behind the scenes of Lifnei Tzimtzum, that the Reshimu is from that place. The ma'achashima er kodim shenisalim harimuhusa er atzmei, being that the Reshimu is an impression from what was there before the Tzimtzum, like he says kodim shenisalim, so it has it's privy to, and so to speak, aware of, well, not in a revealed way, but it has within within its so-called, if you call it the psyche of the Reshimu, has that etzema er mehusa er asmei prior to the Tzimtzum. Now, in the example of the artist, which I am going to refer to because to me it works very well, not every detail, no example is perfect, but remember, what the artist is investing when he's doing the art is not necessarily everything that's in his heart and soul. I should rephrase that. Of course it's there, but what you see in the art is not necessarily, Like, for example, let's say you say a beautiful horizon, a sunset. Now, you can take a lot of lessons from that, but then you find out, for example, that when the artist painted that, he was going through a very difficult time in his life, and that sunset, in a sense, gave him hope and consolation. You would not, unless you were a real brilliant person or you knew the story, you would not necessarily know what's going on in the atzmus mahus of the artist when he did it. What you see is the beautiful sunset, and it also has a message. Like I mentioned with the building, you can build a house and you can live in it, but you don't necessarily know all the deeper intentions of what the builder of this house had when he built this house. You could be focused more on the beauty of the architecture, of the design, of more external things. So in that sense, the Reshimu is carrying those inner, deeper messages pre-tzimtzum, which, of course, if they remained revealed, you can never create the art either. So you must have the tzimtzum, obviously. Okay. Mashenk and a kav. So kav, on the other hand, is the implementer. The kav is the paintbrush that the artist is using to create the actual art. Yes, his intentions, his kavana, his pnimius, his atzmus mahus is embedded in there somewhere, but the kav itself, on its own, its role is to implement, is to draw the painting or draw the art exactly as he wants it. Because its purpose is to come after the oil was concealed and all those inner forces are concealed, and now create the arts piece by piece by piece. Or the teacher teaching Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and learning it piece by piece. And we're not talking about what's deeply embedded, as I said in the Rishim, we're talking about the Kav. So it's not coming from the Atzma Sa'ir, because it's now, on the contrary, it's an energy that's tailored to the recipient. Or in the art, it's tailored to be a certain details that can create a structured piece of art. So it's not Atzma Sa'ir. Shari Atzma Sa'ir Nesalim. It's only a reflection. So that's the first advantage or quality or virtue, if you wish, of the Reshimu over the Kav. Then he goes further and he says, Uba Protius. Now he breaks it down to what levels are we actually talking about. So now he introduces the concept of what was going on before the Tzimtzum, which ultimately would lead track 1, Reshimu, track 2, Kav. And here he introduces back from the beginning of Ayin Beis, the Esesphere Sagnuzis. This is a Beprotis Yuvun that we explained earlier. And this goes back to Shlach, the first volume in the beginning, that the root of the Eris before the Tzimtzum are from the Esespheres Hagnuzis. In other words, before the teacher began to teach these details, before the artist began to paint these details, he prepared himself. And what did he do? He envisioned within himself what are the details going to look like. So Aleis HaRatzon means it arose in his desire. We're not talking deeper than the actual desire to paint this art. We're talking about that, and it breaks into 10 hidden spheres. However, as we're going to explain in a moment, these 10 hidden spheres are not yet on a level where they can't yet be expressed, because they are on a very high level and all united, as we're going to learn in a moment. But that's where the Kav is rooted. I didn't want to mention this yesterday because I didn't want to confuse matters. In the beginning of Ayin Beis, and especially in other places, in Samach Vav, it's something I'm actually giving a share now in the Kollel on Thursdays. This next 2 Thursdays, by the way, there won't be because of Hanukkah and Yitzhak Kislev, so I'm not giving a class Thursday and the next, just as an aside. That the Kav, there's another opinion that the Kav is rooted in the Er HaBlikvul, not in the Esesphere Sagnuzis. Why am I saying it? Just for the record, that there is another opinion that the Kav actually also has access to higher states. But that's not relevant to our discussion here right now, because here the focus is, according to the opinion, that the Kav is Esesphere Sagnuzis. So now, what is these Esesphere Sagnuzis? They're not Nemetzias Nikeres, they're not yet discernible, and they're in a state of utter Hisarvus Visardus, completely mixed and joined, united together, like all in a concentrated cell. So their intensity of Gili pre-tzimtzum is so intense that you cannot discern and distinguish, and it's all, so to speak, encompassed within the Eir Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. So based on that, so the kav is going to originate there, but it needs, basically, if you put it in a formula, the kav is Esses Sfiras Agnuzis plus tzimtzum. The Esses Sfiras Agnuzis is the root of the details that the kav is going to create in existence, the 10 revealed spheres. And the tzimtzum is necessary to diminish or to conceal the intensity of the 10 hidden spheres as they're still encompassed in their source, in the Eir Ein Sof. So it's like the teacher has prepared in the 10 spheres, what hidden spheres, what he's going to teach, but he still needs to conceal it in order for the student to be able to receive, and that's when the kav comes into play. Now the Rebbe Rashab is going to introduce, back from the beginning of Ayin Beis, 2 more levels. One is going to be called Eir Ha'elal Kulona, he says. So now there's also an Eir Ha'elal Kulam. In these 10 spheres, or these, you have an Eir Shalamayla Mamuhus Atzman. That's higher than the very spheres themselves. It's, like I said, the synergy that is more than the sum of the parts. But that's also part of the Esses Sfiras Hagnuzis reality. However, the tzimtzum is now going to have 2 different impacts, that, as he continues. The tzimtzum causes the Eira Elal Kolona, going back to the analogy of the artist, that even though he's creating art and made up of details, there is a Eira El Kolona, there's a certain synergy that comes from all the details that's more than the sum of the parts. But that is essentially, in a way, the God's vision of the art, which is more than the details. That needs to be nostalgic. The Eir Elal Kulam, that is completely concealed. And also the Eir of the Esses spheres themselves, they also go through a diminishment. So basically, 2 things are happening to the Esses spheres Agnuzas. The tzimtzum is causing the Eir Elal Kolona, that synergetic element, to be completely concealed, and is diminishing the 10 spheres. So now they can actually come in the kav into specific details. So to use the example of the teacher, when he's teaching students, so 2 things have to happen. That the picture of the entire thing he needs to conceal, because the students are not ready yet for that. They need to hear the details. You can't begin with the Eir Elal Kolona before you have the details. It's like if you read a book or you read anything, first you need to read the story. Then you can say, now I know the details. Now I understand that there's a synergetic sum of more than the sum of the parts. So that is concealed completely. Then what is, and as far as the actual transmission of the details, it goes through a tzimtzum b'derech miyut, that it shouldn't have the intensity as it was pre-tzimtzum. Then now you can actually say, let's say Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Me'imesai, Kernes, Hashma, Ma'arvin, Mishnah after Mishnah, or Pasuk after Pasuk. You're learning the details. You're learning Breishis Bara Elokim. A child hears Breishis Bara Elokim, God in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. They don't yet sense the synergy of it all. So those are 2 effects. And all we're still talking here, not in context of the Reshimu, we're still talking how the kav emerges. So what you're seeing from this is that in addition to what he said before, that the kav is only from what he said, a reflection, not from Atzmos Ha'er. As you break it down further now, we see it's in more detail, the kav associates with the actual hidden spheres, but in a very diminished form after a tzimtzum, and it's less connected and less revealed, the Eir Elal Kolona, that's nostalgic. Okay. So now, that's why he says, V'im Kain, Hariyakav. Again, I'm reviewing what we learned, but with a little more slower to be able to dissect it. V'im Kain Hariyakav, Hu la'acher b'chinas silukum mi'ta'er. So both elements, the kav follows either the siluk of the Eir Elal Kolona or the miut of the Eir within the 10 spheres, hidden spheres. On the other hand, so the kav follows that. It comes after this concealment and diminishment. Reshimu, on the other hand, the Reshimu, as we know, is not impacted by the tzimtzum. And let me explain what that means. It means the tzimtzum didn't impact the Reshimu, it impacted the effect. It's like the oil receded and all you're left is with letters. But as we learned, the letters themselves were not touched by the tzimtzum. That's why it's called the Reshimu. It has everything from before, an impression, but it's concealed. So the Reshimu, on the other hand, has the message of the 10 hidden spheres, both in the gilui of them, and let me explain. An impression of both elements in the 10 hidden spheres, the message in the very spheres, and also the synergy of the Eir El Al Kulam. From a Kav's point of view, both of them are either concealed or diminished. Whereas the Reshimu, it's concealed completely in the sense that the Reshimu doesn't, you can't see it, but the Reshimu itself carries the full impression of it. So in other words, the Kav is, because it's a Gilei Eir, it is a diminished form of Gilei Eir. The Reshimu was never subject to Helam because it itself is a Helam. As I explained, a curtain can diminish and diffuse the light of the sun, but it can't affect something that's coming through the curtain that's not subject to Gilui. In other words, there are many things that come through a curtain, like for example, air. You can put a curtain on your window, the light will be diminished, but the air will come through, the oxygen will come through the curtain, so to speak. But it's not Gilui, it's not air. Okay. And then comes even more than that.
So what does it mean? There is a change in the Reshimu, is not the Mahus HaOyer, it's a Reshimu only.
I thought I explained this at length. The Rebbe Marash himself explains it. We're going to learn it more because the Tzimtzum didn't affect the Asius. If you, for example, I mentioned yesterday an example. Let's say you have objects that are right here on this table. Okay, but they're completely covered because it's all covered in water. Then the water recedes and the objects suddenly remain. Did the Tzimtzum affect the objects or did it not? It didn't. It affected the Gilui. In this case, the objects, of course, are concealed. But I mean to say, the objects themselves, the fact that you remove the oyer through the tzimtzum does not affect the koyach hagvul and the sheresh hakelim and the oisis of the reshimu. That's what the Rebbe Marash says. Why nogaba tzimtzum? Secondly, he says, so it affects the impact of the oisis because right now the oisis cannot reveal ideas. But then he goes further. He says even the impact of the oisis is affected not because of them, not because they're lacking the ability to express an idea, is because another outside force removed them. So for example, if somebody wrote a book, you have a book, and you understand, you're reading, there's ideas conveyed through letters. Then for whatever reason, it's just as an imaginary exercise, someone removes the ideas from the letters, that when you read it, you can't understand what it says. It's a bunch of letters that don't make any sense. The idea was removed. The oyer was removed from the oisius. The oyer was removed from the kalim. So the tzimtzum affects the reader because I can't understand it, but the very oisius are not affected. The Rebbe Rashab says further, if you, for example, somebody went and distorted the letters, let's say they erased the letters, then you actually change the letters. He says that tzimtzum le'nogat tzimtzum because the letters were not changed. The fact that you can understand it is because an outside force removed the oyer, but bring the oyer right back and the letters come alive. Whereas if you had erased the letters, or then it would be nagabat tzimtzum means it affects the very letters themselves, not its effect on others, and not as a result of its own action. The kalim, in other words, the sheresh kalim of the reshimu, as we're learning here at length, is intact. However, it's concealed. But there is an existing impression post-Tzimtzum of the Atzmus Muhusa Er, and now he adds not only the Er El Al Kolona, but also the Er that's even higher. So he said the Oid Zeis, Shakavu Rak Mechinis Espashtus Er, like we said before, or he called it before Ha'ara, Hain Mechinis Alei Saratzen, Chitzenius Ha'er, like he said, Asiya Datzilus or Malchus, and the Reshimu Yesh Bragam Mechinis Pnimis Ha'er, which means even higher than the Er El Al Kolona. In other words, we're not just going to the artist as he sees the synergetic vision that's more than the sum of the parts, but also the artist as he is within himself, even higher than the whole spheres altogether. Even the 10 hidden spheres and their Eir El Al Kulona. So you're going to La'atzmei Sharigam, Ha'ir Hazen is Tzamtzum in Nesalim. Because also that Eir was concealed, but the Reshimu carries an impression from that as well. And now he gives the example, the moshel, that when a teacher is mashpia seichel, mashbos ha-seichel maravel talmid, so when he conceals his intelligence, he doesn't just conceal, he has to conceal also the seichel as it is to himself. Like he just said. Because if his seichel that's revealed to himself remains revealed to him, we know that he has to conceal it from his students. But if it still remains, it will still have a bearing, and his teaching will not be able to be focused and tailored to the students. Gam la'atzmeh, he says. So and then he could bring the oyer that relates to the student. So as I mentioned, I'm a lamed dardiki, a teacher teaching children Aleph Beis. Even though he knows that the Aleph Beis carries all kinds of deeper meaning, what an Aleph is, what a Beis is, etc., he can't even think about it when he's teaching. If he's thinking about it, he's not going to apply himself properly and tell a child, Aleph, Beis, Kometz Aleph, Kometz Beis, Ba. So all that has to go through a tzimtzum, and that's what he says. So what is it, Lamaila? Shegamchin is primus ha'er nisalim. Not just the Eir El Al Kolona, not just the 10 hidden spheres. Al Yidei tzimtzum. The imkein gama Eir Hazen nishar Reshimu. And from this Eir was also remained in the Reshimu. So now he explains the Levad Zeis sheyesh ben b'chinas haprimius shebechitzenius the Eir El Al Kolona. Remember the Esosphere Sagnuzis in this context is chitzenius. Why is it chitzenius? Because it's already the structure, but it's still as it's encompassed before the tzimtzum. The Eir El Al Kolona now he's calling the primius of the chitzenius. It's the synergy that's more than the sum of the parts. And then there's the real primius that's even higher than that. So in addition to having the primus of the chitzenius, the Reshimu, yesh bagam mepchinas primus ha'er mamish, meaning the primus ha'er as it is in the artist, even preceding the very art, including the synergetic element. And that's where he concludes. I'm going to read the top now. Top of page 1269. Va'kolu ba'Reshimu mepchinas mohus va'atzmus ha'er. And all this is in this concealed impression. It's carrying an impression of all of that as it was before the tzimtzum. The im leikein, because if you don't say that, how do you call ein ze reshem ha'er hakedem? You can't call it a reshem. And being that this is what remained an impression from the previous Eir before the tzimtzum, so it captures and has within it mamish the Eir before the tzimtzum, which the kav, at least on the kav does not have quite like the Reshimu. But as we're going to learn shortly, it's all in a concealed state in the Reshimu. If you skip the parentheses, which is around 10 lines, 9 lines, just look at the line, the 5 lines from before the end of the paragraph. Raksha Reshimu nisalam ha'ir k'noida. In the Reshimu, it's all concealed, but in that concealed state, it's all there. Just to make this a little more palatable, there are many things we carry within us that no one sees, even we don't see. That doesn't mean it's not there. The Reshimu, you can say, and I'm just using my own words here, you can say is a type of super-conscious state that no one's conscious of, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It's like saying somebody has a tremendous talent, a musical talent, but they've never expressed it, as opposed to someone that doesn't have a talent. So to the naked eye, you don't see. Both people look alike. But to a trained eye, and if you start bringing the kav into the picture, and they both start playing music or singing, the kav, the person that doesn't have that tremendous talent, there'll be some beautiful music, but when the kav touches and reveals the prodigy, the power of his song will suddenly come alive, even though it was dormant. So essentially, it's like a dormant state. That's another word you could use. But it's there. That's critical. It's not there. In other words, if there was no Reshimu, you would not have post-Tzimtzum any impression, even a concealed way, of what was before. You'd have the Kav, and the Kav could reveal much. Let's not diminish. The Kav is a quite powerful force. The Kav has to go through plenty of diminishments to create existence. But a full picture of what happened before the Tzimtzum, the witness to that, and that may be a good word too, the witness to events pre-Tzimtzum in the full glory is the Reshimu, but the Reshimu is basically deaf, dumb. It can't speak. What I mean by that is it can't reveal on its own. It's all there. It's like a silent witness to everything that happened before the Tzimtzum. Actually, I think that is a good way to describe it. A silent witness to everything that happened. The Kav is a speaking witness. It's revealing. So it reveals piece by piece. And obviously, working together with the Reshimu, you'll have the best of both worlds. But for right now, the practical purposes, we want to know that the Sheirish HaKelim is higher than the Sheirish HaEdus, because the Kelim basically, as he's going to explain, bear that witness, however it's quiet and silent, like the Reshimu. So that's what he said so far. Now we're up to this parentheses. Now, this is not over. This is the Rebbe Rashab is going to go at least another page or more, 2 pages, still speak about Reshimu and Kav before he comes back to the whole understanding of Kelim and Eris, and how the Kelim have something that the Eir does not have, a deeper root. So I would suggest to learn the whole thing, but I'm open. But if somebody wants clarification of anything we learn right now, I'm happy to provide it. But bear in mind, there will be more discussion on this. So it's far from over. But I thought it was valuable.
I have a question.
Just a second. I thought it was valuable to go over all of this because it's a very fundamental to the whole structure of Hishtalshlus, but it's a very, very fascinating concept. Yeah.
Yes, maybe I missed it because I haven't been around, but we know that we have a sense of the importance of the Kav as it relates to us. Does the Reshimu have any purpose that is known to us?
Of course.
Because I don't see it.
You don't see it. There'd be no kalim. There'd be no body. There'd be no containers altogether if you don't have a Reshimu. It's like having Eir without kalim. The Kav without Reshimu does not have kalim.
Okay, so the Kav is only for or and I got you. Thank you. And it's not the Reshimu is not an aura like the Kav is an aura.
The Kav and the Reshimu is like a neshama and a guf. It would be like asking, what happens if we have a soul without a body?
But the Reshimu is not an aura like the Kav.
It doesn't matter. Body is also not light. It's a container. We're talking also on the root of it all. This is the root of the containers and the root of the energies. The Kav we don't relate to either. The Kav has to go through many levels until it becomes an Eir that can enter into a Keli. We're talking now on the root of 2 tracks. One is a track of revelation, and one is a track of containing, like energy and matter. It's the root of it all. The Kav will go through many levels before it becomes like essentially Chachma, Eir HaChachma and Klei HaChachma. Just like the neshama goes through many levels before it becomes the power of vision in your eye. That's already a slapshus. That already comes into structure. We're talking about this, the root where it all begins, the 2 tracks. Okay.
But the Reshimu is also Lachar Tzimtzum, right? Even though that is connected to...
I'm not sure what you mean. What the Reshimu is a full impression of everything before the Tzimtzum. That's the way he says it. So I'm not sure what you mean.
No, because before the Tzimtzum, it's not a Reshimu. It's more Begilui.
Before the Tzimtzum, there's only Eir Ein Sof, Mamala, Kol, everything. All these levels we're talking, correct? The Reshimu emerges after the Tzimtzum, yeah. The question is, okay, there's a parenthesis now that we want to read. Let me see. He says, V'ha'inyan hu, the inyan in this discussion now, in the comparison of Reshimu and Kav, he says, the inyan who Zeh Yudua, this is known. Okay, this is a very actually profound piece. I'll try to cover it now. I don't know how much I can cover in the time, but let's see. This is known, the Acharat Tzimtzum, that after the Tzimtzum, Chazer v'hoyer, Chazer ha'oyer v'hoyer. This is the expression in Eitz Chaim. It says the Tzimtzum concealed everything. It left a cholol l'mokem poni, basically a void, a space. And then, Achar kach Chazer v'hoyer, that's the words. That Himshich kav echad, God then extended one line, think like a laser beam of energy, and it returned chazer v'hoyer, meaning that the oyer that was completely concealed, now a part of it came back and returned into the cholol, and that would be the kav. U'makol mokem, he says, harihu ba b'bchinas hagbola b'bchinas mitzias. So even though he's qualifying, the kav, let's not forget, the kav is also coming from before the tzimtzum. The kav is not its own creation. It's not like the Reshimu is an impression of the whole, like the witness, the silent witness. And the kav is coming from some other direction. No, the kav is also coming, originating, and it's even chazer v'hoyer. That's the heyer. It means it's returning. That means you're not saying it's a completely new thing. Something is returning from what was there before. So the Rebbe Rashab wants to now explain, so what's the difference between the kav returning and the Reshimu, which is an impression of it all? So he says like this, Mikol Mokim, so even though it's true, the kav is attached and is flowing from before the tzimtzum, but remember, it came after the hefsekat tzimtzum. It didn't remain. There was a pause. There was a complete silence. There was a complete concealment. And then it returned. So the Eitz Chaim talks about this. He asked the question, if a kav was going to return anyway, why did God have to conceal everything? He should have just concealed everything except the kav. Why do you say everything was concealed and step 2 comes the kav? And the Arizal answers, because if he did it that way, the intensity of the oyer would still be overshadowing and not allow the kalim to really emerge. So first you need the teacher complete silence, then he begins the flow. So it comes after a pause. Okay, so we see from that, so even though it's chazer v'heir, nevertheless, it's in b'chinas hagbola, it's now in a defined way, as we said, the spheres, each sphere specifically, and b'chinas mitzias. The difference is hagbola means parameters, and mitzias means substance. There's something to talk about. You can talk about something that exists. Now remember, in the kav, it's still in a very amorphous state, but it's the beginning of the process, and ultimately will evolve as it becomes more oiris and kelim. V'hainu, says the Rebbe Rashab, v'hainu, and this means shegam ha'er k'meishula atzmei. Remember, we talked about the air that way it is to himself, not le'azulas. Shezeh b'chinas pnimis ha'er. That's pnimis ha'er, like he said before. Ein b'chinas ribi ha'er u'b'chinas pshitis k'meishul lifnei hatzimtzum. Okay, this is already a little more complicated. That also the air, the way it's to himself, pnimis ha'er, is not the way it is in the ribui, in the intensity, and in the shapelessness, the way it was before the tzimtzum. So in other words, in the oyer, in the kav, even though it's coming from before the tzimtzum, but it's now not the same, it's completely qualitatively a very different type of oyer. Ukamuven ma'amoshel the Rav Talmud, like it's understood from the Rav and Talmud that he has to conceal his inner understanding of the ideas to teach the student. Okay. The Rebbe Rasham now says, so let me just spell it out, and I think maybe I'm going to stop here because it's going to be a little more dense, needs more explanation. So when a teacher knows, let's say, a brilliant teacher, he knows the whole Shas, he knows all of Chassidus, and he's coming to teach children Ayin Beis. So a lot of things are happening here. That he has to leave room for the students is obvious. He needs to make a tzimtzum, a cholol company, so the students can even be in his presence. If the teacher in his full glory is flowing with ideas, no one could be there in that presence. They just will not have a sinis mokum. So he needs to conceal. He himself does not lose his intelligence. It's not like he becomes diminished as a result of teaching the students. But on a gilui level, he can be focused now on the depth of his understanding when he's teaching Ayin Beis. So that he has to conceal everything from the students initially is clear. When he starts transmitting, which is the kav, that too can have within it all the power of his understanding of the whole idea because he's teaching Ayin Beis. He can't be thinking about all the depth or else he will be distracted and won't be able to focus on and give the proper attention to the student. A teacher has to come down. So the halamas that are going on here are, number one, he's concealing obviously the idea, like the 10 hidden spheres even. In other words, even as he prepares to teach the students, how he knows it in himself, he has to conceal to then give it bite-sized, spoon-fed. The Eira El Al Kolana also, the big synergy that comes after you know all the details and above. And the Primus Ha'er, which is his internal understanding, what he calls la'atzmai, how he understands things on his own, has to be concealed. So from the perspective of the students, the kav, in other words, the transmission going to the students, there it's concealed. From his perspective, it's there somewhere, but it's not in a revealed way, even for himself. So that's what he says here. When it comes to the kav, Primus Ha'er cannot be in a state of ribu and pshitus like it was lifnei tzimtzum, like we see from the mashal of the teacher and the student. That's only, however, how you measure it and how you look at it from the perspective of the worlds, of the recipients. But if you're talking from the perspective of the teacher, how it is, like he says, it's exactly the way it was before the tzimtzum. Nothing really changed in the teacher. However, from the point of view of ilmis, you don't see that. So the kav, even though it does come from before the tzimtzum, you don't see that pnimius. The Reshimu, you don't see it, but the whole impression is there because it's a perfect impression from what was there before the tzimtzumim, including the tzimtzum of the pnimius that is going to the student, that is concealed from the students. You know, I'll already read to the end of the parentheses. But when we measure it, or when we calculate it, when we marichim, when we evaluate it, or we from the perspective of l'gabe ha'elamis, like when the teacher, for example, is busy transmitting and teaching to the student, so that very energy that in himself is receded, when it's coming to the student, it's not the same pshitus, even though it's originating from there. Because remember, the ideas he's teaching, even the Ayin Beis, is not disconnected from his intelligence. It's still, like I said before with the kav is still coming from before the tzimtzum, but it came after the hefsek, and everything pre-tzimtzum in the kav is not the way it is in its original state. Whereas in the Reshimu, you have an exact impression without any change of what was there, but in a concealed way. So that's in volume 2, in that Maimer. And the Reshimu, it's coming from the Ribuy Ha'oyer, that intensity of energy, and its shapeless and seamlessness, exactly it is be'etzem husei, without this shift that the kav undergoes. So now he explained also the idea the kav does come from before, but this is the key difference. This parenthesis is a complete beard of the Rebbe Rashab in this concept. There's more to say on this, but it's already, we'll pause and we'll stop here. At the end of the parentheses on page 1269.